Everything you've been told about surviving the subarctic winter is a lie. Or at the very least, a massive misunderstanding of how heat actually works. Because for decades, we've been building homes like wooden boxers that fight against the wind instead of working with the earth. Back in the late 1940s and early 50s, a man named Ed Oehlerich arrived in the rugged, wind-swept plains of Delta Junction, Alaska, a place where the wind docent just blow it, screams across the glaciers at 80 miles per hour, dropping temperatures so low that spit freezes before it hits the ground. While every other homesteader was busy sweating over heavy log cabins, notched wood, and massive stone fireplaces that burned through cords of wood in a single night, Ed was doing something that made his neighbors think he'd finally lost his mind to the cabin fever. He wasn't building with heavy timber or deep foundations. Instead, he was dragging strange corrugated metal sheets into the snow remnants of World War II Quonset huts and claimed he could stay warmer than anyone else in the territory using nothing but the physics of a curve and the insulation of the earth itself. You have to picture the scene. It's 1950. The Cold War is heating up. And here is this lone man in the Alaskan bush building what looks like a giant metallic bread loaf, half buried in the dirt. While the veteran hunters nearby laughed and placed bets on which night he'd eventually freeze to death. They called it Ed's Folly, mocking the way the silver metal reflected the pale winter sun. Certain that the thin steel would turn his home into a literal refrigerator the moment the sun dipped below the horizon for 3 months straight. But Ed Oehlerich wasn't just a tinkerer. He was a man obsessed with the idea that the old way of building, the way humans had done it for 1,000 years, was fundamentally broken because it ignored the fact that the ground stays warmer than the air. He began digging into the permafrost, layering his Quonset-style roof with feet of sod, moss, and loose soil, creating a subterranean hybrid that looked more like a bunker than a home. And as the first record-breaking blizzard of the season approached, the laughter from the town began to die down into a nervous silence. The locals huddled in their traditional cabins, watching their thermometers plummet to -40 and -50 degrees, burning through their entire winter wood supply just to keep their tea from freezing on the table, all while looking toward Ed's dark, silent mound in the distance. They expected to find a frozen corpse when the storm cleared, but what they didn't realize was that Ed was sitting inside his crazy tin can, wearing nothing but a light shirt because he had unlocked a secret of thermodynamics that would eventually baffle the scientific community. As the wind howled outside, the most shocking part wasn't just that he was alive, but that his cabin was maintaining a temperature of 55 degrees, higher than any other structure in the valley, without a single log being thrown on the fire. But how could a thin sheet of surplus metal and a pile of dirt outperform a foot-thick log wall? And what did Ed find buried deep beneath his floorboards during that first winter? That changed everything he thought he knew about the Alaskan soil. The secret to Ed Oehlerich's success was in the expensive materials or high-tech heaters. It was in the way he manipulated the thermal mass of the Alaskan earth, a concept that was almost entirely alien to the homesteaders of the 1950s who believed that above ground was the only place a civilized man should live. When the mercury in Delta Junction hit a bone-chilling -60 degrees, the internal temperature of a standard log cabin would often struggle to stay above freezing near the floor. Yet Ed's Quonset-covered dugout was sitting at a comfortable 65 degrees. A staggering 55-degree difference compared to the ambient temperature of his neighbors' homes. He had discovered that by sinking his living quarters into the earth and covering the arched metal roof with thick layers of organic insulation, he was effectively using the planet as a giant battery that stored the residual heat from the summer and the small amount of warmth generated by his own body and a tiny stove. The curve of the Quonset hut allowed the fierce Alaskan winds to glide right over the top of the structure instead of slamming into a flat wall, which meant he didn't lose his precious internal heat to wind chill or air infiltration, which is the silent killer of most traditional homes. While the townspeople were waking up every 2 hours to stoke their massive wood stoves, Ed was sleeping soundly through the night, proving that the primitive way of building into the hillsides was actually the most advanced technology available to a man with no money and a lot of grit. News of this miracle cabin began to spread through the Delta Junction area, and soon, even the skeptics were making the trek out to his property, standing in his doorway and gasping as the wave of dry, stable heat hit their frozen faces. Ed would show them his thermometer, laughing as he explained that while they were fighting the environment, he was simply hugging it, using the natural insulation of the snow and the soil to create a microclimate that defied the laws of the North. He had effectively created the first passive house of the Arctic, long before that term was ever coined by modern architects, using nothing but military scrap and a deep understanding of the land he stood on. But as more people tried to copy his design, they realized it wasn't as simple as just burying a metal shed. There was a specific, almost surgical way Ed had layered his materials to prevent the permafrost from melting and collapsing the whole structure on top of him. He was walking a razor's edge between the warmth that kept him alive and the heat that could destroy his foundation. And as the winter deepened, he noticed a strange phenomenon happening in the corner of his workshop that shouldn't have been physically possible. The ground wasn't just staying warm, it was starting to act like it was generating its own energy, and Ed began to realize that he had just built a warm house. He had accidentally tapped into a geological anomaly that was unique to his specific spot in the valley. If his calculations were right, he wasn't just surviving the winter, he was sitting on top of a discovery that could make the entire concept of heating bills a thing of the past for every Alaskan pioneer. As the years went by, Ed Oehlerich's Quonset cabin became a legend in the interior of Alaska, not just as a feat of survival, but as a blueprint for how humans can inhabit the most inhabitable places on Earth without destroying the environment or their own bank accounts. He proved to the world that crazy is often just a word people use for things they don't yet understand. And today, his principles of earth sheltering and aerodynamic design are being studied by engineers who are looking for ways to build sustainable colonies on places as far away as Mars. The 55-degree heat difference wasn't a fluke or a tall tale. It was a documented reality that challenged the building codes of the time and forced the government to rethink how they housed soldiers and workers in the Arctic circles. Ed didn't care about the fame or the scientific papers, though. He stayed in his quiet, warm mound in Delta Junction, watching the seasons change and enjoying the fact that he was the only man in the territory who didn't have to spend all summer chopping wood just to stay alive in the winter. His story serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the best solutions are found in a catalog or a high-end store, but in the trash heaps of history and the dirt beneath our very feet, waiting for someone with enough courage to be called insane to dig them up. We often think that progress means building higher and shinier, but Ed showed us that real progress is building smarter, more efficiently, and in harmony with the brutal forces of nature that we so often try to ignore. If you ever find yourself driving through the windswept plains of Delta Junction, looking out at the vast, frozen horizon, remember the man who built a metal cave and stayed warm while the world froze around him? His crazy idea changed the way we think about shelter forever, and it's a lesson in self-reliance that we desperately need in our modern, fragile world. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden history of the North, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because we have dozens of stories of forgotten pioneers and mad inventors that the history books didn't tell you about. What do you think? Would you be brave enough to live in a buried metal hut if it meant never paying for heat again? Or is the old way of the log cabin still the only way to go? Let us know in the comments below, and stay tuned, because next week we are uncovering the story of a man who built a literal castle in the desert using nothing but recycled glass bottles and a dream that everyone told him was impossible. Would you like me to generate a catchy, high CTR thumbnail image of Ed's Quonset cabin in the Alaskan snow to go along with this script?